Joseph wants to know, what are the biggest misconceptions of MMT?
The big lie. The big lie. The federal government is exactly like me and you. We need income. We have to get our money from somewhere else before we can spend. And that's what we're told all the time. The federal government must get their money from somewhere else before they can spend. We have to borrow it from China. We have to get it from taxpayers. That is the biggest misconception of all, because it creates this link that if we believe the big lie, that we have to get money from somewhere before we can get things that we need to survive. We have to get money from the rich before we can have health care. We have to get money from the military before we can fix Flint's pipes. It creates a prerequisite that we have to wrest money from the cold, dead hands of the powerful or beg them for charity before we can get anything. That is easily the biggest myth of all. Easily, because it pits people together. So, as I said last week very clumsily, racism is a tool to tear the people apart. Xenophobia is the same thing, a tool to tear the people apart. All of these, I forget the term with homosexual, the anti that is a tool to tear the people apart. And economic ignorance is the same thing, is a tool to tear the people apart. And it pits people against each other. So we say, oh, we must get money from the rich in order to pay for stuff. Then this huge population of people comes to us and say, how dare you penalize success? Who creates the jobs anyway? So we can't take the money from the rich, even though it makes no sense to take money from anybody. Taxing the rich is incredibly important to reduce inequality. That's as a progressive, I believe that's true. We must tax the rich in order to decrease their power. They should not be able to buy politicians. They should not be able to extract wealth from our sickness and our death and our suffering. But you not only shouldn't we tax the rich for their money, we can't tax the rich for their money. It's not possible because the federal government creates its own money and doesn't need any income. Same with the military. We must reduce the military, in my opinion, because we're belligerent. We're the bullies of the world. And we can't do it immediately. We have to do it responsibly because we've been horrible for so long. But I believe we should reduce the military, as I'm sure many people agree with in this audience. But we can't reduce the military in order to get that money for something else. It doesn't make economic sense to do that. And the big lie, creates this link that we must reduce the military in order to get their money to pay for healthcare. We must tax the rich in order to get their money to pay for the programs that we need to survive. And that is easily the biggest misconception of all. It pits everybody against everybody.
Well, that's a misconception that people talk about in regards to like what MMT, that's a misconception in the world, right? And MMT tries to combat that misconception, according to their theory. But
Yes.
Joe's question specifically, I think what he wants to know is, what are the biggest misconceptions about MMT itself? Since you've been involved with these theories, what are some misconceptions people have about MMT? Do some people think it's a wrestling move? What's going on?
Understood. Yeah, no, that's different. That's different than I thought. People think that MMT is something that you do. It's something that you prescribe to. It's something that we must choose to implement. And it's nothing of the sort. It's knowledge. It's just knowledge. MMT is an expression of how our economy actually works. It is not, MMT doesn't say we should tax the rich. MMT doesn't say we shouldn't. MMT doesn't say how much we should or shouldn't. It doesn't say any of these things. So our government takes the knowledge of MMT and chooses to give the wealthy, as many tax breaks as they want. But what MMT does say is that if you tax the rich, then it would have these macroeconomic effects related to reducing inequality and related to empowering the people. It is not something that prescribes anything. It only describes. And a big misconception of MMT is that people are afraid to subscribe to it because they feel like they therefore must choose to pursue certain things or choose to pursue them in a certain way. But it's just like medicine. You can choose to, if you learn medicine, you can choose to cure people. You can choose to do horrible Nazi experiments. You can choose to never practice at all. You don't blame medicine. Medicine doesn't describe what you should do with it. It's just knowledge. And the same thing with modern money. It's just knowledge of how things work.
Okay. So then MMT itself, doesn't actually suggest we start pumping. I mean, does MMT itself, like as far as, and when I say MMT itself, I mean some of the thinkers behind this, does it go as far to suggest that we should start using this knowledge to actually bring about programs that help people? Or is that something that progressives later latched onto?
I think that the major economists of MMT, I think, could generally be described as progressive, because there's no consequence of being progressive, because there's no negative economic consequence to doing these things. So it doesn't say, actually, if you could repeat the specific thing that you mentioned.
Well, I guess what I was getting at here is you don't really see people on the right talking, at least not to my knowledge. Correct me if I'm wrong. I never hear people on the right really talking about MMT. It's more talked about in the progressive communities. Okay. That could be a reflection more of just the circles I usually find myself in. But to my knowledge, I've not really seen it being talked about a lot on the right. So, what I'm asking is, and I think you answered my question, actually. So you're saying it's more of just a natural, because people subscribe to the tools of MMT and the knowledge base that is MMT, they're just naturally progressive because they're thinking, well, we can just print the money to have all these great things. Instead, we just print the money to help the elite and the powerful. They're in on this big scheme, essentially, and they're trying to keep it from the rest of us. Well, it's time for us to take it back.
I mean, as far as the right, what I can say is that the powerful have a very big incentive to not have us understand this, because it would educate us on how to stand up to them. But MMT is what reveals the big lie to be a lie. And it shows that the powerful hide behind the big lie to hide the fact that they simply don't want to give it to us, and they're simply being selfish and want to stay powerful. It reveals that. So it's an excuse. The big lie is the excuse to pretend that, oh, I want to do these things for you, but I can't because of these external things, these economic things that are out of my control. When the truth is that they just don't want to give it to us because it empowers us. As far as the right, the people, I'm not talking about the politicians on the right, but just the people on the right. They are terrified. Not they. There are a lot of people that are terrified of their taxes going up, and they look to the big programs that we want, and healthcare and education and so on. And they're not against healthcare and they're not against education, but they are terrified that implementing these things will raise their taxes. And so they are genuinely believe that they will go bankrupt. Their family will go bankrupt. The country will go bankrupt. And so they stand against our progressive programs because of their taxes going up, even though it makes no economic sense for their taxes to go up. So as I said before, it pits the people against each other. So if we could educate the people who believe that their taxes are going to go up, that in fact they don't need to, then how many of them would join us and fight for these things, fight for this healthcare stuff? I think that the politicians on, I'll say the right, I don't really have my head around what that means, but the more conservative, people that cater to the powerful, I think is, they have an incentive to educate the people and distract them with racism and xenophobia and so on to get what they want.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your news on